And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light, that I may tread safely into the unknown."
And he replied, "Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God.
For that shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way." And so I went forth, and, finding the hand of God, trod gladly into the night. And he led me towards the hills and the breaking of the day in the lone east. A poem written by Minnie Louise Haskins in 1908, and it lay somewhat forgotten about for over 30 years, until on Christmas Day 1939, as the country was being plunged into the uncertainties of World War II, those very words were transmitted across Britain and the Commonwealth. They were spoken by His Majesty King George VI, live from Sandringham House in Norfolk. At the time the poem was said, the broadcast ended, and that was about it, until people started asking, where did those words come from? And so, the following day, the press managed to find who had written those very words. The media descended on Crowborough in East Sussex to a now rather elderly lady who up until then had been enjoying a quiet Christmas with her sister.
In Christmas card weather, Pathé Gazette cameramen meet the authoress of the quotation with which the King ended his Christmas broadcast. Miss Haskins has been made famous by her inspired words.
And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown." And he replied, "Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God."
I'm in a fortunate position to have a somewhat direct link to poetry. When I was very young, about 3 years old, my gran, on my days off from nursery, would take me round to see her friends. And back over 50 years ago, she and my grandfather lived on an army base in the middle of the Ashdown forest. And over 30 years after they moved away from the base, she still returned to the forest to meet one of her closest friends. And I remember driving through the water splash and through the forest and up a very long winding driveway, over a little bridge and a little stream, and arriving at a little house in the middle of the forest and meeting a very old lady. And my gran and her would sit and drink seemingly endless cups of coffee and tea, and I'd play on the grass. And I remember when I grew up, as I was getting older and starting to understand the world, my gran always used to say to me, "Remember that lady, she's very special." And she was one of my gran's closest friends, and it's only recently that I have come to realise who this lady was. Her name was Olive, and she was a poet, a writer, a farmer, but perhaps more interestingly, she was an anarchist. In 1932, at the age of 18, Olive wrote a poem which described Hitler's rule of Germany as seen by a Dachshund dog. And at the time she was living with a relative in Germany, and she sent this poem back to London to be published in the Punch magazine when it got intercepted at the German border by the Gestapo, and Olive was arrested and deported from Germany under armed guard. When she arrived back in London, she wrote for the BBC and appeared regularly on BBC Radio Children's Hour. After the war, with her husband, she moved to Lear Cottage in the Ashdown Forest near Coleman's Hatch, and spent much of her time raising geese, hens, sheep, pigs, chickens, and growing a number of fruit and vegetables. She and her husband, who was the actor David Markham, were active members of the Committee of 100, who campaigned for direct non-violent action against nuclear weapons. It was on that basis that in 1974 she and her husband were arrested by the KGB in Moscow and deported for protesting the use of psychiatry in the Soviet Union. 2 years later, after many years of tireless campaigning, she was successful in getting the release of Soviet dissident Vladimir Bukovsky released, and after his release from prison he was brought back to Lear Cottage on the Forest to recover. In 1980, Olive published her children's story Goodbye Day, which proved incredibly popular. After David's passing in 1983, she rarely wrote again, living a quieter life in the forest with her animals. That wasn't the end of Olive, however, for in 1988 she took the Central Electricity Generating Board to court for, quote, conspiring with the government to make plutonium for the making of nuclear weapons. My memories of Olive would stem from about 2006 and the summer months when we'd sit outside and I'd play on the grass. And Olive was always, to me, a very, very genuine and quite normal lady, and little did I know at the time how fascinating a life she had led. But I am so fortunate to have been able to have the opportunity to have been with her and to have been in her presence. During 2006, Olive's poems were brought together for the first time in a collection called Out of My Mind, published by a Scottish poetry press called Happenstance. This found her works a whole new audience and popularity. In 2007, Happenstance published an anthology called Unsuitable Companions, and it arrived at Lear Cottage, which delighted Olive because not only did it contain 2 of her works, but it also contained one of her daughter Jahane's. The day after the arrival of the anthology, Olive died at Lear Cottage at the age of 92. Her beloved hens that she had reared for much of her life dwindled from 80 to 1. The remaining one was given to a neighbour 5 days before she died. It's important at this time of year to appreciate those you have around you, as well as those you have had the privilege of knowing. Earlier this year, on Commonwealth Day as it happens, I lost someone who I had grown incredibly close to. Bob was always the first person I would turn to if I needed any help in Norfolk, and I told him everything. I confided in him with everything that has happened in Norfolk, and because of this, the advice he could give me was totally invaluable. I remember on Christmas Eve last year, I was with Bob ringing a quarter peal, and there was a little bit of time before I had to go back to his tower to ring for midnight mass. And he said, "Why don't you come round to my house?" So I did, and when I arrived, there was a 2-course meal waiting for us. And we sat there and talked about what had been going on. And the advice he gave me then, and up until that point, will remain with me until I die. Despite only knowing Bob for 3 years, he welcomed me into his home at Christmas and treated me as if I'd known him his entire life, and that is something I will be forever grateful for. The quote, "Grief is the price we pay for love," is never more true. 2025 has also seen the deaths of a number of other significant people. Dame Joan Plowright, Baroness Olivier, who was married to the incredible stage and screen actor Laurence Olivier, died in January. In April, Easter was marked, as it always has been, with the speech by Pope Francis at the Vatican. Pope Francis had been in very poor health for a number of months, and There was uncertainty as to whether he would be able to deliver the speech. He came onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica and greeted everyone, and the speech was delivered for him, and you could see his frailty. But after this, he travelled round St. Peter's Square in the Popemobile. Little did anyone know that these would be the last photographs of Pope Francis.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona Pasqua. Chiedo il maestro delle cerimonie di leggere il messaggio. Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater, et Filius, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Some breaking news to bring you now. This is a statement from the Vatican. A short while ago, His Eminence Cardinal Farrell announced with sorrow the death of Pope Francis. With these words, he said the following: "Dearest brothers and sisters, with deep sorrow, I must announce the death of our Holy Father Francis." At 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the house of the Father. His entire life was dedicated to the service of the Lord and his church. He taught us to live the values of the gospel with fidelity, courage, and universal love, especially in favour of the poorest and most marginalised. With immense gratitude for his example as a true disciple of the Lord Jesus, we commend the soul of Pope Francis to the indefinite, merciful love of the one and triune God.
During the summer, we lost a true icon of heavy metal music. Ozzy Osbourne was the lead singer of Black Sabbath, and only 2 weeks before his passing had delivered his final ever concert back in his hometown of Birmingham. His unique voice and style of music transformed music across the world and gave birth to what is now called heavy metal. Ozzy was not only a singer, he was also a large celebrity on TV. His show, The Osbournes, following his family around as his children grew up, was just truly hilarious. On the 3rd of October, Dame Patricia Routledge, who was the star of Keeping Up Appearances as Mrs. Bouquet and had appeared as Hetty Wainthropp in the detective series Hetty Wainthropp Investigates, passed away at the age of 96. Earlier this year, in February, I arranged a court appeal at her home city of Chichester to mark her 96th birthday, and she was so deeply touched by the honour that she came down to the church to listen, and I was given a bottle of wine by her in her gratitude. This was one of the biggest privileges of my life, and it was just one of the many things I could have done to say thank you to a lady who had graced the screens of British television for over 70 years and had made millions of people across the world laugh. Let's take a look back on some of her best moments.
There's one thing I can't stand, it's snobbery and one-uppishness. People who try to pretend they're superior. Makes it so much harder for those of us who really are. Oh, it's you, Violet. It's my sister, Violet. The one with the sauna and the swimming pool and room for a pony. I hope that's a first-class stamp. I object to having second-class stamps thrust through my letterbox. When I turned on my tap this morning, it didn't look like my water. It's not as bright and sparkling as I'm accustomed to. It looks to me as if it's been used. After all, it's only an accident of birth that I'm not someone important. Well, I am someone important. It's simply an accident of birth that I'm not even more important. Even aristocratic. My eccentric sister likes to give the impression she's poor. Very wise, I think, don't you, these days, with so much burglary about? I could telephone number 23 and tell them that if they're being burgled again, they can phone us and we'll sound our alarm. Have you seen my holiday brochures? You can't miss them. There's one about the Orient Express and the other's cruising on the QE2. Oh! So in future, could you look like someone who enjoys doing his own gardening but could afford a gardener if he wanted to? I will not have you waving in dirty gardening gloves.
They get dirty when you're gardening, Alison.
Can't you keep one pair for gardening and one pair for waving?
And finally, on the 1st of December, Derek Croen, a resident of our village for over 70 years, died aged 87. In 1978, Derek founded Croen Fabrics Limited, who went on to become one of the world's leading producers, designers and suppliers of fabrics for home furnishings. But not only this, he spent much of his life supporting charities and local causes. He was a donor to the Westminster Abbey Restoration Appeal, and a window in the Lady Chapel bears his name. In 1994 and 1995, he was a recipient of the Queen's Award for Export. Twice a day, every day, for 7 years, I'd walk past the big gates of the old rectory, each gate displaying DC for Derek Croen. He loved this village, and he was proud to call it his home for over 30 years. In the 1990s, Derek featured on Southern Ways, which was a TV programme that, over the course of 6 days, highlighted every single wonderful thing we have to offer in our fantastic village. let's take a look back on his appearance.
The most stunning residence in the village, I think I can say that with some confidence. It's owned by one of the country's most successful businessmen. Over the last few years, he's seen it develop into a home in the village he loves.
This is why we spend a lot of time here. This is where my grandchildren are going to spend all their time. We're beautifying the grounds. We've already planted about 2,500 trees in the ground. We're now, as you can see to the right, we're refurbishing the gardens this autumn to make it a place of beauty for next year and allow people from the village perhaps to have their garden parties and participate in the village life. It is, in my opinion, the most beautiful village that I've seen. It's got a wonderful community spirit. Everything revolves around the village green. I can walk into the village within 5 minutes. There I have beautiful shops, pubs. The amenities of the sports, football ground and cricket ground are all close at hand. I regard it as a great privilege to live here in Horsley Canes and live in such delightful surroundings.
As we look ahead to 2026, which will see celebrations to mark 10 years of the Ring Ollie channel, let us take time this Christmas to be thankful for those we have around us who have shaped our lives and made us into the people we have become. And it is in that spirit I wish you all a very happy Christmas and every good wish for the coming year.